When I bought this lathe, I would have wished that my school book on lubricants came with it. Unfortunately, it didn't, and, well, that's what happens to brass tips if you run them on steel without lubrication. Anyways, what is, and it's time to, actually fix this problem. So, I seen a video online, I think it was Blondie Hacks, that, she took her steady and put bearings in it. So I think, I'll get some Loctite and glue these to the tips of those brass and everything will be good. Just like that. All done. End of video. Uh, or I could actually do this properly, which I think I probably will. So the first thing, is thinking about how much of this I'm going to use and how much of this I'm going to recycle. And deciding that I'm going to use a fair bit of it, the first thing I'm going to do with this steady is to actually try to make these cuts on the bottoms a little flatter, so it's a lot easier to tighten up when it's in the lathe. For that, I'm just going to get my lathe file, and the reason I'm using my lathe file is because the edges do not have any teeth on them, and they will not cut into the other metal on those angles. And as you can see here, a few passes by, and all the edges were proud, and the centers were all shallow. However, I'm going to keep cutting down until it's a lot better than that. And as far as this rocking, um, it's going to end soon. I did pick up a welding table that's about 2,000 pounds, and I'm going to mount my table vise to that. This is the point where I figured good enough is good enough. For the video, I'm just showing this with one hand on it, but actually, when the camera was off, I had both the hands on this parallel, and I was running it back and forth with my eyes down at level sight with that, and light coming in from the window behind it. So if there was any discrepancies on any of these three surfaces, I could see them with the light shining through. Then on the base, it was just a matter, just cleaning up a little bit as well. None of this stuff was precision ground or anything like that, and nor does it have to be. I think it's like a 5/8 nut through a bolt that's holding this thing together on there, and it's just intended to, not move all that much. Though I figured since I was cleaning this thing up, I might as well do it totally. So on this, that screw, I thought that came through the top, and the barrel got pushed in the bottom. Luckily, I left most of the steady together and just took apart what I needed to work on it, because that screw actually came up through the bottom, and that little rib on it got caught on a keeper in there to prevent it from coming through. So now it's just a matter of getting some measurements on this and figuring out exactly what I need to do to make the pieces that I want. So the barrels themselves, I'm going to remake them because I want to keep the original ones intact if I ever decide to, you know, put brass cones on them again and use them that way. So it's just a matter of making some new barrels and making the tips that will hold those bearings. And the first thing I'm going to do here is cut my rod for the barrels and for the tips um, completely. So the whole piece will be cut, and I won't be going back and having to cut, various pieces over and over and over again. So when this gets cut to spec, just open up the the jaws and the lathe and sends most of that back into the spindle and work on a small piece to get as rigid as possible. Unfortunately, a little later on, it turns out that I did have to cut some more pieces for this, but not the end of the deal because there was a little bit left on here that was two size, and I just cut to that size, and once I hit it, it was good. A little bit of cleanup here, and that's about it for the prep for the stock on this. The next part of this is actually making three barrels that will screw up into the steady, and after that, it's making the tips with those bearings on it. I'm not sanding all of this because most of this will be inside the chuck, and as it gets built, then I'll give it a better finish. So I'm just giving the end a little bit of a finish with some emery cloth here before I snug it up a little tighter in that chuck. But like I said, not doing the whole thing. So one of the things I did, I went out and bought like a $17 drill bit because I did not think I had the size needed for this. And I think it was 10 seconds into the operation here, and that was the end of the tip right there. Ironically, I had a 50-cent Canadian Tire drill bit that drilled out the $17 drill bit. Um, Not saying anything bad about the $17 drill bit, but I was pretty happy with that 50-cent drill bit for Canadian Tire. Once that got all fixed up and everything else, then the next thing to do was actually thread the body. And if you look carefully, you can see a little cut line on the top of it by the chuck, and that's where where the length of that is going to be. Um, so after getting it drilled, I went out and I got a really nice tap to do this, and it's like $45 tap or something like that. But I gotta say, it was like the best tap I ever used in my life. It was so nice to work with. Unfortunately, it seems like everything I do, and I do have quite a lot of taps, and it seems like everything I do, I never seem to have the right tap that I need. So I think by the time everything's said and done here, I'm probably going to have like 100 to 200 different taps in my collection. So after I got all tapped out, the next thing was to screw in the screw. That's part of that study, and start getting some measurements on it to make sure everything is still going to work out the way it should. The one thing about that tap is it would not uh, thread right through. So what I originally thought was going in from the other side as well and threading on that side for the housings of the bearings to screw in, and then I got thinking that's the dumbest idea in the world. There's just absolutely no way in the world, besides putting those things back in a machine and cutting them over and over and over again constantly, that those bearings are going to stay 90 degrees to the workpiece. So I did figure the easier idea was just to overbore the back side of it, so when that screw got through the threads, it was in an open chamber, wouldn't get bound on anything. And then it was just a matter on the little pieces that hold the bearing, just to make them a little thicker. As you can see here, like I tried this with a reamer, and you can see where I got the mark on there. And when it got close, it just gave right out. So I did go with a drill, with a depth gauge on it, and that worked just fantastic. When I got really close, I pulled it out, let it get rid of some of the shavings in there, and then went back in and cut the length on all the pieces. And that gave me the open bore on the end where the bearings are going, and also the thread on the other side. And I do have to say, doing this, and I was looking down these pieces, making sure that I didn't drill through the threads, and it came pretty close quite a few times. So next thing, and it's the top I'm working on there, and there's the barrel. The next thing is it for that top to fit in nicely, and it does. So that's always a plus. And again, these are only cut to about 3/4 of an inches. And then at this point, catastrophe hit. And instead of looking at my drawing and figuring out where I was drilling the holes for those bearings to sit in, I figured I'd just eyeball it when I was doing the drilling on them. And when I put that chamfer on the end of these, it kind of gave me the impression that the edge was not as close as I thought it was. And I drilled them out about an eighth of an inch too far back. And as such, um, everything was destroyed. It had to get rebuilt completely. The first one that actually came through with enough room in there for the bearing to go in was paper thin on it. So when I actually started work on these, order of operation was really important. On the first one, it was a eighth inch drill, and then a larger drill that accommodated the bearing. And then I went and nailed down the back so a set screw or grub screw could actually sit on that and keep it from turning when it was in the steady. The next one, the first thing I did when it came in, being that I had the end mill in there, is I milled down that flat spot on it, and then proceeded to cut the holes for the bearing. And the last one, I cut the holes for the bearing first because the drill was in there, and then finished off with that end mill. One of them, because the parallel got thrown askew, one of them ended up being offset a little bit. It still works fine, just a little offset. Um, this part of it was actually, cutting in there to give a track for a set screw that's on the steady to actually run back and forth, so these can't actually turn when they're in there. And 180 degrees on from this on the other side is where I had to drill the hole for the set screw or grub screw for the tops. Um, Looking back on it, I can't remember what exact. Oh, I remember what I did. I put them inside of a C5 collet and put that into a square holder and then just flipped it. And that's how I got the 180 degrees on that to drill those holes. And so these are the first ones here. They're getting built. And like I said, they didn't work. You can see there's a little bit of chamfer on the top there, and how far back that hole is. These really had to go down quite a ways to accommodate for those bearings. And unfortunately, it is what it is. You can see the newer one right there. That part of the shaft is a lot less that goes in, and the top part is a lot longer, so that hole can go up quite a bit higher for the to accommodate on those bearings. Um, Got pretty good at making those parts. So as I said, everything was going good, but I didn't calculate for having to make those three parts again. So I did have to, take a little bit of metal back down. And again, at the end here, it was two spec, and you can see it's coming down and just about meeting it there. And when it got to the point where it was just taking like a thousandth off, that I called good. The pins fit well in this for the bearings. There's a little bit of Loctite in there to keep the bearing from moving too much, but it's not the end of the world on that. They got a lot of tolerance on there. And this is the part where I'm glad I left those other two in, because that screw actually goes up through the bottom, not through the top. And I thought for sure that those barrels went in the bottom and the screw went in the top, but no, wasn't the case. And anyways, after tearing, another one of those down, it was really obvious how this thing was put together. Screw in the bottom like that, sits in there. Top cap goes on it, and after that, that barrel goes in the bottom, and then after all that, the attachment for that bearing goes on, and then it can be adjusted up and down accordingly. So just about to the end here. It has been a while since I put something up, and it's not that I haven't been doing things. It's just my shop just got a whole new look, and built a shed out back, and went to an auction, and unfortunately, one of the machine shops in my area shut down. Um, but I did manage to get some materials and a table and a few other things in that auction, and still got a bike in the middle of the shop and one against the wall to have to deal with. But for now, I do have a lot more room in the shop to work. And with this, again, putting this thing back together, there's a couple little screws in there. One's for tension and one's just a lock, so it will not go out any further than that lock allows it to. And after that, it's just a matter of putting those ends on. The tiny little grub screws that go in there are not in there. I needed to get another tap that unfortunately I just didn't have, and it had to be 1/4 inch by 20 TPI with a bottom tap, so it could actually thread down in there. My taper tap was hitting the other side of the bearing race before it would actually tap. But that's it. The thing's working pretty good. As you can see there, that top wheel's turning a little bit. bottom one's going good and the other one's not tightened up at all. But that's just a matter of, the material or that piece just being thrown in there for the video. That is that, and I'm not sure what I'm gonna try next, but I think it might be something to help me out with doing some work with threading. And, quite the project, and glad it worked out at the end.